Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Vimbai, and good morning, Rufai.
Oh. Oko, my man.
That's me.
Oh, my man.
It's both, to be honest. Thank you very much. Let's get into what is happening around the world. Now, are you a wrestling fan? Because if so, the last name McMahon should ring a bell. Vince McMahon's wife, Linda, has been picked by President-elect Donald Trump to serve as his education secretary. Now, Mrs. McMahon had previously served in his first administration and supported his presidential campaigns. She did provide $6 million to help Trump's candidacy after he secured the Republican presidential nomination back in 2016. Now, she did unsuccessfully run twice for a U.S. Senate seat in Connecticut, but despite that, despite the somewhat shock of her nomination, she does have some background in education, serving on the Connecticut Board of Education in 2009, but she is largely seen as an unknown in the education industry. Now, moving on to Russia now. Russia has ramped up fears of a nuclear war. Vladimir Putin released a document warning that he could use his nuclear arsenal for retribution as Ukraine fired US missiles into Russia. That being said, Russia has gained almost 6 times as much territory in 2024 as it did in 2023 and is advancing towards key Ukrainian logistical hubs in the eastern Donbas region. Meanwhile, Ukraine's surprise incursion into Russia's Kursk region is faltering. Russian troops have pushed Kyiv's offensive backwards. That offensive has been called a strategic catastrophe given the manpower shortages faced by Ukraine. Now, these developments come at a time of heightened uncertainty with a second Donald Trump administration looming. President-elect has vowed to bring the war to a close when he takes office in January, with some fearing he could cut off future military aid to the Ukraine. It's also worth noting that Vladimir Putin has said he is open to the prospect of a ceasefire with Ukraine, depending, of course, on whether or not Ukraine can understand that it needs to not make any more advances into Russian territory and concede what it has already done. So perhaps there is a light at the end of the tunnel. To Africa now, and the opposition leader of the self-declared Republic of Somaliland, Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi, has won the territory's presidential election. More popularly known as Iro, he won with 64% of the vote to become Somaliland's 6th president since it broke away from Somalia in 1991. What's interesting here is that during campaigning, Iro did say that his party would review a controversial deal to lease landlocked Ethiopia a 20-kilometer section of its coastline for 50 years to set up a naval base. It's an agreement that has caused a diplomatic feud in the region. Somaliland, in return, expects to be recognized by Ethiopia as an independent nation. Now, as we've discussed many times in the World Brief before, this has upset Somalia, which regards Somaliland as part of its own territory. Now, President-elect Iro has never rejected the deal out of hand, but discussing it, he does use diplomatic language, which suggests perhaps a change of tact. Somaliland is, as we've already mentioned, located in a strategic part of the world and is seen as a gateway to the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. Now, despite its relative stability and regular democratic elections, it has not been recognized internationally, and it is desperately hoping to do so. We will move very quickly onto our newspapers so that when I come to my great colleagues, we can have a buffet of information. Now, let's move on to our newspapers. This Day, this morning, leads with President Tinubu insisting that Nigeria cannot prosper as a whole until every part of the country thrives. Tinubu says that Nigeria must transition into a federation defined by order, stability, and safety. And also, Enugu State Governor Peter Mba is prioritizing education. Now, he says at the soul of any successful nation is knowledge and not assets. To underscore that sentiment, Enugu State has spent 33% of its budget on education. And he made these comments at the first Enugu State University of Science and Technology Distinguished Personalities Lecture Series entitled Experiential Learning, Building the Wealth of the Nation. Now, the governor has set his sights on Nigerian universities, featuring on global rankings of the best universities. Moving on to the New Telegraph, and it leads with news that 10 Nigerians are among 100 people, 100 foreigners executed in Saudi Arabia this year. It's the largest number of executions in 1 year. In addition to the 10 Nigerians, the people executed include 21 from Pakistan, 20 from Yemen, 14 from Syria, 9 from Egypt, 8 from Jordan, and 7 from Ethiopia. There were also 3 people each from Sudan, India, and Afghanistan, and 1 each from Sri Lanka, Eritrea, and the Philippines. In 2022, Saudi Arabia ended a 3-year moratorium on the execution of drug offenders, but executions for drug-related crimes have boosted this year's number with 92 such executions so far this year. Earlier this month, President Tinubu was in Saudi Arabia for the joint Arab-Islamic summit, where there were discussions for a $5 billion trade facility, but it is unclear if the president discussed the possibility of clemency for the Nigerian citizens who were due to be executed at that time. Now, The Guardian reports on the 2025 appropriation bill. Its article argues that revenue agencies, including the NNPCL and the FIRS, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, as well as the Nigerian Customs Service, may need to magically increase its revenue by over 200% next year to break the 14-year trend of overstated revenue projections and prevent another failed budget cycle. It goes on to say that the 2025 budget stands to generate contentions at the National Assembly, except the overambitious parameters contained in the medium-term expenditure framework for 2025 to 27 are significantly changed. The Punch now leads with the PDP crisis ahead of the party's National Executive Committee meeting on November 28th. There are indications that Umar Damagum has perfected plans to remain as acting national chairman of the party until next year. The Punch goes on to say that the Damagum-led National Working Committee is scheduled to meet with 36 PDP state chairmen and the FCT chairman at the party's headquarters today. To the front page of the Daily Trust now, and the Sultan of Sokoto says that traditional rulers are not afraid of governors. That was in response to Governor of Niger State, Babangida Aliyu, who said that they were. Now, the Sultan went on to say that traditional rulers were ruling the country even before Nigeria gained independence, adding that as monarchs, they have more stake and understanding of the country than governors. And finally, the Daily Independent leads with news that the Nigerian Navy has been accused of sabotaging efforts to combat oil theft. To Kenya, and the Daily Nation's headlines leads with "Things Fall Apart." William Ruto, one of my favorite novels actually, William Ruto is due to deliver his State of the Union address tomorrow, which is supposed to outline his administration's successes and plans for the future. But whatever he says may be overshadowed by the 47 counties in the country threatening to shut down operations over a cash crunch. Education and healthcare in the country are being marred by strikes by lecturers, and that new social health authority which has left patients stranded in hospitals. And finally, in the UK, The Times has farmers bringing Whitehall to a standstill yesterday after a huge protest against the inheritance tax hike. Whoa, that was a mouthful of international news today.
I can imagine.
And
the shocking thing for me, seeing that protest, is my very good friend Jeremy Clarkson. What is he claiming now? He's campaigning for the farmers as regards inheritance tax and says it's going to affect me. Jeremy Clarkson is a very rich man. I mean, he's just benefited from everything good. And the BBC, I should say. Let me go to what's happening on the Horn of Africa.
Okay.
As regards that, yes, what Iro was saying while he was campaigning was the fact that they were going to review that deal to be able to grant Ethiopia, that port. Mm-hmm. And it was deliberate on that naval base, in the port of Beira, the Red Sea port of Beira. And it was deliberate because what Ethiopia was saying on the table is that if you grant us this port, what we'll do is we'll just consider, recognizing you. Which is a far cry. How can we grant you a port, 50-year lease on a port that exists, and you just consider with all of that? Mm-hmm. So what Iro is saying is that, no, we're going to review that contract in such a way, and there's been a lot of agitation, that if we grant you that lease for that port, you will then recognize Somaliland. Also, there were many other issues in the elections. There was the issue of Puntland.
Yes.
The rebel group, the breakaway faction in Somaliland, trying to get their own independent nation. There was also the issue of the economy. And the incumbent wasn't just listening to the cries of the people and all of that. This has taken a very interesting dimension because you now have all the enemies coming. You remember the case we dealt with the other day as regards the dam? that Ethiopia too was trying to do because they're largely landlocked and Egypt wasn't happy about.
Right.
Because this has angered Somalia, Somalia is quickly running to Egypt. They just signed a defect pact recently.
Yes.
So it's like, come stand with me and all of this. But let's see how all of this pans out in the coming days. As regards Mrs. Mahone, she also fought in the WWE as a wrestler.
I didn't want to mention.
She also fought in the WWE as a wrestler. But I'm going to cut her some slack. The slack is she had served in Trump's cabinet, as an administrator for small business and all of that. So let's say she's got political experience, but she's got no educational experience apart from the board.
A little bit on the board, yeah.
And she was hard to lead because of her political leanings and all of that.
Yes.
So, but ex-wrestler is going to be the one that. I mean, is this not the same Trump that says he's going to just shut down everything about the education, department because he wants to push it back to the states?
Yes.
So is she going to have a lot of work to do in the first place? Only time will tell. So a wrestler, I mean, she looks so super fit, She'll beat all of us here.
Let me pick up where Rufai just left off with regards to this appointment. Another one that excited me was Dr. Oz as well, television personality, was also nominated for, I believe, one of the medical departments. But with regards to education, this push to decentralize is gaining a lot of momentum. Yesterday, I know a lot of the media focused on the fact that Texas, the Texas Education Board, is now pushing to include Bible lessons in the elementary school level.
I saw you post that,
well, because you know some of us are doing the Trump dance. But, of course, it's going to face a lot of pushback because the question is, why should, the Christian religion, teachings take priority over any other thing? They would be optional Bible classes, though, but I think it's something that Trump's core fan base is really salivating at and getting really excited about. So it'll be interesting to see what some of those other curriculum changes would be that will happen if they are to decentralize the education system. And it's also something that I also just thought, this is an interesting idea in a federation like Nigeria. I wonder what would happen if we were to really decentralize the education system and let people learn what's unique and what gives a strategic advantage to whatever state they belong to. But from that, I believe the other story that interested me was from Daily Trust. Yes. Daily Trust, it was a small story at the top of the page, which was that 13 months later, the Tinubu administration has still not appointed ambassadors. So they did their research work and so forth and just found that they're really, it's a struggle for foreign policy to move forward because these embassies are currently headed by chargé d'affaires, in some instances, maybe even lower ranking officers to that. And these people don't have the rank by diplomatic protocol and procedure. They can't go and meet with foreign ministers. They can't. So right now, Nigeria, in essence, is an island because we don't have ambassadors representing us in all of our diplomatic missions, which is, really a shame.
Concern.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vimbai.
Okay, let me start with Somaliland, which is the story you brought about Riso, right? That's his nickname, who won the election with 53% of the turnout. But what is more important about Somaliland is the fact that it's not recognized by many countries of the world. Only Ethiopia recognized it, and also Liverpool City Council, and also Gavin Williamson, former UK Defense Secretary. So the international recognition for Somaliland is the big issue. Now, Gavin Williamson, you say he's been talking to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, when he assumes office, is likely to recognize Somaliland. Now, Barack Obama sided Somalia. Biden sided Somalia because in 1960, the two countries, Somaliland is also a former British protectorate, decided to come together. Now, but in 1990, Somaliland unilaterally decided to go on its own. But the international interest in Somaliland is because of its strategic location along the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden. But the major concern for the international community will be that the whole of that axis is a location for international terrorism and piracy, with the Houthi rebels joining with the Al-Shabaab to cause problems in that region. One of the issues relating to Trump is that we'll see what Trump will do this time around when it comes in January. Don't forget the fact that it was Donald Trump that pulled out American troops from Somalia in a very dramatic situation. But now we have Riso, becoming president in Somalia. But the bigger dimension goes beyond Somaliland or Ethiopia or Somalia. Very quickly, now that takes me to Trump. Some of his appointments have been very controversial. It's not just Linda McMahon, wrestling champion, wrestling woman, CEO of WWE.
Yeah, founder.
But she, as you said, she has some connection with education. But generally, his appointments have been very controversial. Robert F. Kennedy, as head secretary, Dr. The man that he has put in charge, Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz, the Turkish American that he has put in charge of Medicaid and Medicare, and then you also have Lutnick, the Wall Street billionaire in charge of tariff and trade.
Yes.
Well, all of this will still have to be confirmed by
Senate.
the Senate.
Yes.
But what we know is that there's a lot of controversy about these nominations, particularly about Michael Guest, who is going to be Attorney General, who has been confirmed by two women as having paid $10,000 for sexual favors and also having sex with minors at an event. Well, he denies it, but that's what the victims,
the accusation is,
the persons involved are saying.
Yes.
Finally, Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, has said that with the attack in the Bryansk region, Kursk, Western Russia, yesterday, on the occasion of the 1000th day of the beginning of the conflict, that this can only lead to World War III. And that is understandable because the Russian doctrine, nuclear weapon doctrine, has been revised with two amendments, that NATO facilities can be attacked and that any country that joins Ukraine to attack Russia, it will be seen as a joint act of aggression. So the world may be facing more serious problems in terms of the escalation of global conflict.